think about that and we can see that there's a reason for that. And the reason is simple. The reason is that Americans mentally are locked in a cage, and they're tied into this very materialistic, hedonistic, individualistic, narcissistic culture that's pushed on them through a multi-billion-dollar public relations agency, advertisements, and a political system that complements that and wants to keep people distracted and disoriented. And art has the power to break people out of that cage. The theologian Reinhold Niebuhr talked about how art can bring groups together. You know, individuals can often relate to each other one-on-one with some comfort and some understanding, even if they bring some ethnic biases to the board. With enough individual interaction, that can change. But groups get stuck in a tribal mentality, where Niebuhr talked about how art destroys that groupthink mentality. But what art also does is resuscitates, revitalizes, and I guess given where we are tonight, revolutionizes the individual mode of thinking. It changes the way the individual thinks. And I'm a personal piece of evidence of that. I'm visual evidence to that, because when I was 13, I discovered Bruce Springsteen's music. You know, I was thinking about things that normal 13-year-olds think about: girls and
Springsteen.
You know, and rock music, and you know, trying to find a few beers to drink somewhere. And I still think about that stuff. But what Springsteen's music did is it showed me a much larger world beyond my surroundings. And it started making me ask questions that at the time I didn't have the intellectual maturity or the education to answer. But just asking questions and beginning that self-exploration and that outside exploration led me to many places where I would try to find the answers. You know, at 13 you hear a lyric like, you know, ain't no church bells ringing, ain't no flags unfurled, it's just you and me and the love we're bringing in the real world. Or you hear the lyrics to a song like The Ghost of Tom Joad, which we'll hear Kevin play real soon. It's disorienting and it's discombobulating, but it's in a good way. You realize that your worldview is very weak and that it can crumble at the first sight of attack. And that's what art has the power to do. It has the power to be liberating. And it also has the power to be connected. It connects people to each other. And when you have free thinkers connecting with other free thinkers, that's something that's very dangerous and subversive to the dominant society. And that's why art is very important. And that's why I focused on Bruce Springsteen's music, because his music had such a powerful impact on me. But I'm sure we can go around this room and everyone can tick off one or two artists, whether they be musicians, novelists, filmmakers, what have you, and talk of a similar experience. The late Jacques Derrida, French philosopher, talked about how the dividing line between theoretical consciousness and practical consciousness is so thin that it's almost to be invisible. Theoretical consciousness is often an important and necessary step to acquiring practical consciousness, which exercises itself in legal, political, and social and moral terms. But before you get there, you have to have an understanding of what your conditions are, what historical moment you find yourself in, and how that all is brought to bear on your life, the status of your community, the status of your country, and indeed the status of the world. So how does Springsteen do that? We're here to talk about Bruce Springsteen. Well, the first thing Bruce Springsteen does, that I argue in my book using many examples, and I think they're very convincing, I must say, is he offers a certain vantage point in terms of how you should view the world. And it conflicts and contrasts with the vantage point offered by the dominant society that tells you to view the world through your stock portfolio, or how much money you earn, or what your social status is. You can go, I'm sure Brandon, who just graduated from Columbia College, and he's I just want to tell you, he's a great writer. Talk to him too, he's a great fiction writer. I'm sure Brandon can relate to this. You could go to college campuses across the country, and you see too many young people who are just viewing their education as a means to acquire a VIP pass for getting beyond the velvet rope of this American nightclub, where inside riches and glory are promised. But that kind of way of thinking discourages altruistic love, it discourages social action, it discourages any kind of concern about social justice. So Bruce Springsteen responds to that, and he writes a song like Streets of Philadelphia, which views the world through a gay man dying of AIDS and looks at his struggle and tries to understand his suffering and how it's enhanced and intensified by the state's lack of response to HIV/AIDS, or how it's enhanced and intensified by his surrounding community, which may demonize him with various forms of bigotry and cruelty. He'll write a song like the very famous and very misunderstood Born in the USA, which many people still understand to be a celebration of America's awesomeness or something else insane. You know, as Ronald Reagan even tried to appropriate it into his campaign. And my girlfriend Sarah just told me on 4th of July she saw in a newspaper. What paper was that? Remember, was it the Tribune? Chicago Tribune. A listing of the top 10 most patriotic songs to play on the 4th of July, and Born in the USA was one of them. What the song is actually about, if you listen to more words that aren't just in the choruses, is about a Vietnam vet whose brother died in that war, who comes home, he can't find a job, the VA, shuts the door in his face every time, and he's 10, as he says in the end of the song, 10 years burning down the road, nowhere to run, nowhere to go. And it's about how people are rendered invisible in our society. And Springsteen navigates that night side of American society and puts you right in that person's shoes and says, this is how you should view the world, through this struggling, suffering Vietnam vet. Understand why he was in the war in the first place that he never should have been. Understand why he can't find employment and why he can't find adequate opportunities for living a life of decency and dignity. So these are some of the examples. I list many more in my book, but that's how it starts. How do you view the world? Whose side do you take? From what perspective do you view politics? Do you view your own life? We can see, as I talked about earlier, the American political system, whether we're talking about the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, which Gore Vidal summarized nicely and said we have one party, the property party, that has two wings, and when one messes up too badly, they throw it over to the other wing. They view the world through Wall Street, insurance agencies, oil companies, so we have this collusion of big money and big government, and it's a nexus of influence, and it's circular. They talk to each other, and they construct a force field-like bubble that keeps alternative voices out and renders people's suffering and struggling meaningless. Well, Springsteen's art combats that with a very distinctive vantage point that views the world through the eyes of suffering people, through everyday people, and links this country's greatness. If it could be great, if it is great, if it isn't great, he links that greatness with how everyday people are treated, how they're respected, and how they're elevated in this culture. So, through that vantage point, he came in his own life to what he calls human politics, something that he